I don't usually even attempt to make recordings when I'm feeling like I'm feeling right now. Specifically, I'm in that weird twilight zone where I didn't get enough sleep last night, and I'm in that still awake but somewhat asleep zone. It's a strange feeling. In any event, it just had me thinking about how wild of a concept time is. Because I learned something the other day that I didn't know. I mean, you probably already knew this, whoever is listening, but I just found this out for the first time yesterday when I was reading an article that was detailing culture creation. How the powers that be orchestrate different trends via popular culture to achieve the desired results. And it's a familiar narrative, I'm sure you've all heard it, where the analysis starts in post-World War II America with the 60s counterculture revolution, which fundamentally altered society. That aspect of it was particularly targeting young people. But of course, there were many other avenues through which they continued this trend in the decades that followed, with the feminist movement. And obviously, we've seen the culmination of that type of rhetoric with Me Too a few years ago, and just in the nature of what a quote-unquote modern woman believes. But anyway, I was reading this article and I had no idea that the term teenager wasn't a thing prior to the 1950s. That concept didn't even exist. And I remember when I was a teenager, it was a huge deal. Everything that I had been told, everything that I had seen, everything around me reinforced the idea that being a teenager was a huge rite of passage. And you were supposed to rebel from your parents in that way. Everybody does that, they told us at the time. That's just what you do. And I hope you can see, as a part of cultural creation, that contributed in a small way to the breakup of the family unit, the nuclear family as it's referred to, as the relationship between children and their parents became more adversarial in a way that it had not been before that time. And that's even more incredible to me, knowing that a quote-unquote teenager didn't exist before World War II. It's like, wow, I had no idea. Obviously, I wasn't alive during World War II. I learned about it after the fact. I was born many decades after that transpired, which just shows you the power that they were able to wield over us via culture. It took, 20 years to create the scenario where all of a sudden a teenager was a legitimate, independent being that had its own thoughts and opinions that were valid in some way, that deserved to be considered alongside adult opinions who actually had some sort of wisdom at their age, whereas you had none. And they reinforce that in culture, right? Well, yes, those are the years where you explore and you go out on your own and you figure out who you are, and you do that independent of anyone else. And again, this is contributing to the breakdown of the tribe, family units, communities. And the article I was reading went into how the Wonder Years, the television show, which I was a little too young to ever really get into, but I've seen a lot of the episodes, obviously, but it was kind of a little before my time. But they went into how that television show really reinforced the idea that the kids, the teenagers, were always at odds with their parents. And that's very evident in the relationship between the main character and his father in that show. What was more interesting to me about the teenager revelation was that it brought my mind back to the idea of why I originally got into all this in the first place, which obviously was to figure out what was going on here. What is the truth of this place that I am in, this place that they call planet Earth? What is it? Why am I here? What is going on, truly? And at certain points along the way, you come across a piece of information that connects 6, 7, 8 other seemingly unrelated pieces of information. And you have that aha moment, that oh my gosh moment, where things just come together in a way that they never did before. And you see the picture more clearly of what might be going on. And after a while, you start to chase those aha epiphany moments like it's a high, in the same way that you chase the highs on any other drug, physiologically speaking. Well, as you know, as you get into any drug more and more, the highs are increasingly difficult to achieve. You need more and more and more of the drug to get the same high that you got before. Physiologically speaking, eventually one day you look at your body and you say, oh wow, I've really lost who I used to be in the process of chasing the high from this drug. And the same thing can happen to you with the chase for truth highs on the internet. This information is very dark, the truth of what's going on in this world, and you just start chasing the highs to the point where if you're not careful, one day you wake up and realize that you have become completely nihilistic and jaded in your view of the world, to the extreme of believing that you live in a literal hell. And that could very well be the truth on some level, at least metaphorically speaking. If this is indeed some type of reincarnation soul trap Loosh farm, which I'm not saying it is or it isn't, it's a possibility. But there's really no way to chase the information down that rabbit hole and come out the other side as a happy-go-lucky person. It doesn't work like that, because the information is so dark. You can't possibly be in a good mood, or at least you tell yourself that. And then you start to use the information that they give you as a part of going down this rabbit hole to justify your miserable existence to yourself. You say, oh, well, those are all NPCs. I'm a Source player. I have a real soul. These people aren't even animated with a soul. They're not real people. And then you take it one step further and you look at the food chain and how violent nature has become, and all of the sickness and the war and the death and the blood. And if you're not careful with all of this information, you wake up one day and you realize that you have been consumed into a black hole of negativity that is turning you into a miserable person. And you can argue with yourself and say, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat the truth. I'm not going to pretend to be happy when there's misery all around me and I'm being subject to so much misery because of this hell that I am incarnated in. And I get that too, but what is your solution as a tiny-brained human being that doesn't know anything? I've had this debate with myself many times. Let's say that's the reality of the situation, just for the sake of the thought experiment. You are trapped within a reincarnation Loosh farm being recycled over and over again. Maybe you've been here many times before. Maybe this is one of your first go-rounds. Who knows? The way I look at it is via analogy to my dreams. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before in the older recordings on this subject, but I know those of you who are new, don't go back and listen to those. So I try to reintroduce a few ideas from older videos here and there for you guys. I've been dreaming my whole life. Year after year after year after year of dreams. If you woke me up tomorrow morning and you said, "Hey, did you have any dreams last night?" And I responded with, "Well, yeah, I had a couple, and this happened, and that happened, and this happened." And then we talked about it, and maybe tried to analyze them a little bit. I mean, I don't analyze my dreams in that way. I laugh at them because there's nothing else you can do but laugh at dreams. They're so absurd. But if the person then asked me, "Did your mind create that dream, or was that dream implanted into your mind by something else?" Use your imagination on what would be capable of implanting a dream in your mind. Again, theoretically speaking, let's say that's possible. Even though I've been dreaming for over 3 decades at this point, my discussion of whether or not my dream actually came from my mind would be the equivalent of walking into an economics 101 class versus the PhD dissertation level. My version is the 101 class, even with all of that experience, because dreams are so abstract and things are being pulled from your subconscious mind, which obviously are things that you didn't remember consciously in the first place. So even then, it would be extremely difficult for me to tell the difference between a real dream and one that was implanted. I would be going back and forth like, well, it had elements that I think were trying to manipulate me, so maybe it was implanted. But at the same time, it had these elements that were directly from my mind. And I'm sure an implanted dream would utilize your memories in that way so that it seemed real. That would be the only way to trick you. So I could get into the discussion of it, but I still would have a lot of difficulty discerning the difference between the two, and I would probably get it wrong a certain percentage of the time. Let's say I've been aware of that possibility for 10 years, and I've been focusing on my dreams for 10 years and trying to figure that out for 10 years. That's a lot of dreams. That's, if you dream every night, that's 300 times 10. We'll round it down from 365, just accounting for the reality that there's some nights where you just don't remember your dreams or you don't have any. So that's around 3,000 dreams that you've done this kind of analysis. And it's like any other subject that you get into initially, you have a very rudimentary understanding of it, and you're an amateur in that way. And that's your dreams, right? Now, if you go with the idea that you're in this reincarnation loop and your memory is wiped every time you come back in, so you don't even have the benefit of comparative analysis, what chance do you stand when you're put in that situation to know that you're being manipulated to come back here or go somewhere else or whatever it is they do, if this is the situation? I hope you see that it is very unlikely that you would be able to deal with that situation with your mind. Okay, I'm going to make a very clear distinction here between your mind and something else. Your mind doesn't stand a chance. In the same way that your mind doesn't stand a chance in the dream world, at least at first, when the manipulation begins, if something was implanting a dream in your mind. Now, you can become sort of lucid as it's happening and sometimes overcome certain situations. And sure, that corollary would potentially be possible in an NDE type of experience, which would be the example you're drawing from about what it might be like in those reincarnation loop scenarios. But it's very unlikely that you would have the capacity with your mind to outthink something so far beyond your ability to comprehend. Something so sophisticated that it could even create that in the first place is IQ-wise so far beyond you that you don't stand a chance outthinking it with the mind. The only thing that stands a chance of overcoming an intelligence that far beyond you and your mind that is trying to manipulate you is that which created you, the spirit of that which created you specifically, which is the spirit of truth, unconditional love. Meaning it's the same here as it would be there. You must place your faith in that which created us to have your back, to help you overcome everything that you are subjected to in this reality and beyond. If that is the situation that we are in, and there's somebody on YouTube who's telling you, I'm going to get you out of here with the mind, they are out of their mind. They're trying to manipulate you, putting things in a team-based format, in a us versus them format. I'm going to fight them when I get there, is no more effective than it is to say, I'm going to fight them here. Giving them that energy only makes it grow stronger. So the only answer, logically speaking, is to humble yourself before God here. Have faith that it will help you both now and when it becomes the time for you to leave this place. At least that's where I'm at with it. There are all sorts of suggestions for what you should do when that moment comes. But personally, I'm not going into it with any kind of expectation whatsoever. Whatever the truth is the truth of the situation. I can't change it. And you would have people that would fight that statement saying, well, it will be whatever you create. And then I have the same objection to that as I do to the New Age propaganda here. Anything that I create out of the mind will end up being wrong because the mind is insane. Whatever it thinks it wants is wrong. And so when you manifest whatever you want with the mind here, it always ends in tragedy. Whether it happens immediately or 20 years after the fact, the bill always comes due in that way. Your mind is insane because it has been subjected to insanity. And no matter how much you think you know, no matter how much you think you've learned, and no matter how much you think you can get one over on whatever is going on here so that you can create this paradise for yourself, it will always end in disaster. Because it is not your design to create something outside of that which has already been given to you. And part of the insanity that is going on here is trying to break you away from that, make you lose hope, become demoralized to the point where you say, all right, that's it. I'm not going to sit here and take this anymore. I'm going to take control of my life and I'm going to manifest what I want. Well, it's no different than saying that about your afterlife. Whenever you are presented with whatever happens to us, you're going to go into it with that attitude. I'm going to beat whatever's on the other side at its own game. You go into it with that mindset, you're toast. It'd be like sitting down with Bobby Fischer when he was alive thinking, I'm going to beat him at chess. And it's your first time playing. He's a grand master. He's going to smoke you with no problem. He could probably play 10 other people at the same time and still smoke you. Versus if you sat down to that same chess game and said, okay, I understand that this person is a grand master chess player. They are unbelievably talented, and they are so far beyond me and my level of understanding of the game that I can't even hope to beat them with my mind. So all I can do is humble myself in this moment and ask for help in overcoming this metaphorical chess game as it relates to what it is a metaphor for in this example. The approach I'm taking here is sort of a necessary function of the fact that you need to know whether this place we are in was always like this. In other words, it was designed to be this, or if it was sort of infected with something that turned it into what it is now. In which case there would be aspects of genuine creation here alongside of that which the intelligence which took it over perverted in some way. For example, every being that existed in the creation before something like this happened was a breatharian, for lack of a better term. It subsisted entirely on sunlight, utilizing photosynthesis in the same way that plants do. Meaning there was no food chain. It didn't exist. Everyone existed purely off of light. And then along the way, something happened, and energy became detached from that harmony and introduced a predator into that situation. And then adaptations occurred, and more predators developed over time to protect themselves from other predators, and on it goes. The food chain begins in that way, and we end up where we are now. I don't know which one it was. I have no idea. How could I know that? That's the answer that I've been searching for all of these years, but it's just one of those things that I don't intuitively know yet, or it's one of those things that I have suspicions about, but I would never force those suspicions on someone else as the truth. No, this is what it is. Oh, you think that? You're wrong. It's one of those things. It's a subject so big, my tiny human brain can't have the audacity to do that. But I hope you see, either way, we're in the situation now. Whatever it was and whatever it was designed to be originally, regardless of that, we're in the situation that we're in now. So the only choice you have left is, what kind of person do you want to be? I have moments where I'm a miserable person. I mean, straight up. I have moments where I'm a miserable person and I don't like any of the people around me. I'm annoyed by them and my perceived view of their stupidity. It happens, I can't lie. I have those moments. But that's not who I am. I want to raise people up, not bring them down when they're in my presence. And how do you hold on to something like that in a world like this? Well, that's the challenge. That's what faith is. Doing the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. Not expecting any kind of reward whatsoever. Not expecting any kind of recognition whatsoever. Just, it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it. No matter who is looking. And the only way you do that is by holding on to the moments of clarity where you are very clearly shown what it feels like to embody the spirit of that which designed you. I had a moment like that earlier tonight. I was cooking dinner and I was listening to some music, which I don't do a lot anymore because you can just see the poison in so much of it in the way that it, to my point, impacts your state of being. But it was a Saturday night, which it isn't anymore because it's so late, but I was thinking, hey, let's let loose a little. That's the state of my life now. Letting loose is, cooking dinner by myself and listening to a little music. But I just, out of nowhere, just started dancing. Like, I don't dance, but in the moment, I was just taken over with this gratitude for being alive and hearing what I was hearing and just started dancing around. Now, as I've said in past recordings, I'm in a different state of mind than 99.9% of the population because my body is repairing itself from severe trauma. And I wasn't able to do a lot of things that normal people are able to do. So I'm standing alone in my kitchen and I just start moving around in awe of the moment that, oh my gosh, I can actually move my arms in a way I didn't used to be able to before. I can actually move my body around a little bit in the way that I haven't been able to for 3 years. This is incredible. And I just have that moment where you're overcome with gratitude just for the experience that you're having. And that's what I mean by these moments being what must guide you through your experience here. Holding on to those moments where you are shown the awe of spontaneous existence. Yes, everything going on in the world is completely insane. To the point that I was getting into at the beginning about teenagers and culture creation. I mean, they are in hyper speed as far as culture creation goes right now. They are dismantling everything that any of us have ever known as far as society goes and turning it into something completely different. And it's shocking and crazy and insane, right? Keeping your balance and holding your center going through trauma like that, going through something like that is very difficult, especially when so much of that cultural propaganda is designed to get us to hate each other in all the ways that we can hate each other, so that we point the finger at each other instead of the powers that be pulling the strings, orchestrating all of it as culture creators. Men and women especially have been programmed to hate each other and blame each other for the state of relationships. Just spend some time listening to Blackpill videos. It's very depressing. Not that the truth is depressing, just the state of being that these people are embodying is very depressing. There's no hope. And they might come to me and say, well, how can you say that? You're probably this thing, the other thing, that thing, the other thing. And it's like, no, I'm none of those things. I'm an old dude standing alone on a Saturday night in my kitchen, cooking dinner for myself and no one else. No wife, no girlfriend, no kids. I've dedicated my life to this. And in that moment, I'm in awe of my ability to just sway to some music spontaneously in a moment of pure joy and bliss. Why? Because I put my faith in that which created me to guide me, knowing that my mind is insane, and if I followed what my mind thinks it wants, I would be listening to Blackpill videos on loop, thinking about what I don't have instead of what I have been given. And if you are one of these people who would accuse me of coping in various ways, I'm sure, which is unfortunate in the extreme, because you're telling me that God is a cope. I mean, you can't get more far gone, nihilistically speaking, than telling someone that the self-evident and obvious creator is a cope. I mean, you've really lost your way, guys, when you're at that level. I don't care what females have been turned into by society. It's not their fault any more than it's your fault. The situation that is. That was orchestrated by forces well outside of your control. If it is in my path to marry someone someday or have kids with someone someday, I mean, that will happen. It will unfold for me. I'm not going to desperately seek it out, because of course anything you desperately seek in that way will be instantly repelled from you. Seeking it in that way creates resistance to the thing actually happening. It's funny, people have a natural resistance to the idea of unconditional love because of the way that it's traditionally sold in New Age propaganda. And I was thinking the other day how similar it is to the student loan issue. For those of you who don't live in America, we have this huge problem where universities have become outrageously expensive to attend. To the point where just a normal state university is costing students $200,000 to $250,000 over 4 years. That's not even taking into account any sort of graduate school, obviously. Which is just an obscene amount of money to pay for a 4-year degree that most of the time you won't even use in your actual job. And everyone agrees on the surface that student loans should probably be forgiven at this point. Look, we need to get this problem under control. All this student loan debt should just be forgiven. I agree with that in principle, yes. However, then when someone in an official capacity introduces legislation along these lines or actually starts the ball rolling, well, then you have this phenomenon where all of a sudden people are against it. In theory, it was great, but now that you're actually going to forgive $200,000 of student loans for everyone, let's say that's what it was, I don't know, it'd probably be much less than that. I think the original proposal was somewhere along the lines of 10 grand, something that wouldn't even really make a difference, but let's just say they forgave up to 200 grand for every student loan debt, individually speaking, and they could easily do that. I mean, in the same way they could easily feed every homeless person instead of investing in war, right? But here we are, right? Back to, where are we exactly? What's going on here? It seems that suffering is encouraged here. This is suspicious. But yeah, as soon as it's actually about to be introduced, you have all these people who say, wait a second, no, actually, now that it's happening, this isn't fair. I went to college and I got student loan debt and I paid all my loan debt back. It's not fair that they're getting off the hook now. They made a bad decision. Even though you made the same bad decision, the fact that you actually had to go through it and pay it back creates this resistance to anyone else actually getting off the hook in that way. You're feeling like you got gypped. And this is kind of how it is with unconditional love. Everyone is fully on board with it in theory, but then as soon as your being is about to embrace it, you are confronted with these scenarios where it's like, wait, hold on a second. That person's going to be forgiven for that? Wait, no, we can't let that happen. I lived my life a way where I never did anything like that. I played by the rules. They shouldn't get forgiven for that. No. I don't know about this unconditional love thing. That's mind control now that I think of it, actually. In the same way, then, by extension, you say that all of religion is mind control, and the man they call Jesus is mind control. And it's like, well, yes, of course, there are elements of that at work. How could there not be? If that man actually existed and creation itself walked the earth, of course it would be copy and pasted into something else to control. But what you miss in that scenario is that the man they call Jesus, if that happened in the way that it is said it happened, I mean, he would have been referred to in today's environment as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist. He would have been telling you about all of the suffering that's going on here and pointing out all of the flaws in the way that the system is constructed and how it's controlling your mind, and on it goes, right? So you miss that whole aspect of it, the truth in it, when you discard it as a way to simply mind control the population and control your slaves. Of course, it's used like that in the way that they constructed the church apparatus around it. But in that way, you're missing the core truth of the whole thing, the beauty of it, of what it was, of what creation did for us, what God did for us in that way. Of course, they pretend to be God. They are con artists. That's what a good con artist would do. Along those lines, another thing that I just recently found out is when, according to the Bible, when the man they call Jesus engaged in the cleansing of the temple, which is where he went into some temple in wherever they were at the time, showing my ignorance here, Judea or something like that, Nazareth, I don't know, who knows. That's where they get you confused with all the names and stuff. I am not a biblical scholar, and I'm very ignorant along these lines, so that's why I don't pretend to be a Bible authority. Okay. Anyway, when the man they call Jesus was confronting the Pharisees and the money changers at the temple, there's debate about how many times it happened. Some speculate that it happened twice, the way the Gospels relate the events. And the first time was a little less severe than the second time, where he allegedly got a little rowdy and called them a den of thieves or something along those lines. But I just recently learned that the time when he really got on them about what they were doing and how wrong it was, because I guess what they were doing was selling all kinds of stuff in the temple, and then specifically they were selling doves to poorer people for animal sacrifices because they couldn't afford the larger animals that the Pharisees were using for their sacrifices. And apparently, within the context of the passage where this transpires, the man they call Jesus is calling them out for this predatory lending that's going on. The usury of it, of course, right? And usury is one of the most ridiculous things that is in existence here, charging money on money. The world would be a completely different place with usury banned. Just that alone would make the world a completely different place. And people would say, well, how would we have a society? I have to get something back for my investment. And it's like, yeah, you could negotiate. Either you get a portion of the business you invest in, say 10% of it, or you agree to a certain amount of money and you say, hey, I'm going to lend you $5,000 and you will pay me back $6,000. I'll make $1,000 on my investment, but there's no interest. You pay me back $1,000, that's it, and you pay it back to me within a certain amount of time. Just say it's 10 years or something like that. Obviously, that would be a step in the direction of having no money at all, which we really don't need in theory, but again, we're dealing with a insane society where these things are viewed by the insane as necessary. So we're talking about steps down the insanity ladder here. So we go from usury to a step below, which is what I just described. Just that one change would make a huge difference. So anyway, the man they call Jesus is sort of chastising them for what they're doing and metaphorically turns over the tables. Well, I say metaphorically, maybe he did that anyway too. But I think it's metaphorically he's telling them how wrong what they're doing is. And What I didn't know is that he was crucified within a week of that event. That was sort of the last straw, where the Pharisees said, okay, that's it. He's ruining our hustle here. He's getting in the way of our money. He's got to go. and that, I hope you see, is exactly what would happen now to someone like that. It happens to anyone who gets in the way of their hustle. Everybody knows about WikiLeaks. Everybody knows about Julian Assange. Pamela Anderson is going to visit Julian Assange in quote-unquote prison. But yet, nobody talks about the Panama Papers. Nobody talks about what was revealed there because, of course, the adage in journalism is follow the money. You reveal all those secret accounts in the Panama Papers, and then people can trace the money, which is why crypto is so dangerous and why all of these crypto billionaires are ending up dead as well based on what they find out and could expose potentially. Because the blockchain, the one downside of it is everything is traceable, even by some unimportant person sitting in front of a computer in their mom's basement, right? Like, even they can open the Block Explorer and track this stuff. Which explains why they're slowly merging it into the CBDC that will be controlled by the federal governments across the world. But you don't hear anybody talking about the Panama Papers because that really was messing with their money. That was messing with whatever they had going on, where people could track the accounts revealed and find out what they're doing on islands and places and things along those lines. And what happened to the woman who leaked the Panama Papers? Well, of course, she was blown up in a car bomb. Exactly what they did to the man they call Jesus for doing the same thing to their racket 2,000 years ago, right? And speaking of that, it's actually incredible that in the Judaic tradition, the man they call Jesus is not viewed as the Messiah because he failed to achieve world peace. In their version of who and what will be a Messiah, that entity must create world peace. And you sit there and you think about that for a second and you're in awe of the audacity of it, because it's like, well, hold on a second. The Pharisees, in conjunction with the Romans, murdered the guy before he ever had a chance to really get started. I mean, don't they say his ministry was 2-3 years long? He was traveling around talking to people, spreading the word. You know, you can't really say someone failed when you kill him, hang him up on a cross after 3 years of beginning to spread a message. And this is why you will hear people refer to the person who will proclaim world peace as the Antichrist, because it is the antithesis of what the man they call Jesus was here to do as a direct messenger of creation itself. And you look around at the world and you can very easily see how that will be. We are witnessing the world government being built in real time, step by step. And you can easily travel to the imaginative endgame of those steps and see where the United Nations has created a world government where there is alleged world peace that has been achieved, and whoever is the leader that comes out of that will be viewed as the Messiah in Judaic terms, as the one who achieved world peace, the chosen one. And from a Christian perspective, that will be viewed as the Antichrist because, first of all, it's against Christ, everything that is being built around us. That much is obvious. But also because we know, having lived through it, that the truth was fully suppressed and not allowed during the process of quote-unquote peace being built in that way. And this is where you have to have a little discernment as it relates to the Bible and the written word, in the sense that at the time that the man they call Jesus came to earth, the overwhelming majority, probably around 90% of the people alive, were illiterate, functionally speaking. They were not on the level of the scribes and the Pharisees and that whole priest class. There was a very small portion of the population that could actually write and read written language, which is why that man went from town to town to town and interacted with people in person and spoke with them in person, gave them parables that would transcend time. And where appropriate, or where moved to do so by forces greater than anyone involved in the situation, certain miracles might occur. In other words, the original following of the man they called Jesus was a spoken following, word of mouth, person to person. And then that priest class that was literate got a hold of that message and began distorting it in very subtle ways, knowing full well that they can't fully remove the words, or else it won't have the power that those words contain, and additionally, no one would fall for it, especially initially. It's the same thing they're doing now with climate change. We can all see changes happening with the weather and our environment, and that part of it is real, but then there's this layer on top of it that is deception, that is being used to create something that doesn't have anything to do with the actual truth. You have to see the patterns with these things. And then that's where you get into ideas of the man they call Jesus, because if it is as it is portrayed, and that was creation itself walking the earth in that moment, it would have been less concerned with the fact that they were engaging in predatory lending of these doves for poor people. He would have sat there most likely and said, guys, you don't have to kill a dove to worship me or my Father, that which I come from, in any way. You don't need to kill animals. We don't ask that of you. This is a part of the insanity that's going on here. And of course, that's left out of the Bible. So that's what I mean when I'm saying the man they call Jesus versus what is codified in the Bible, which is not to say that it's not the Word of God in many ways. I think it probably is, at least as it relates to a lot of the words attributed to the man they call Jesus. But a lot of the other stuff in there is questionable, to say the least. Not to say that it's historically inaccurate and irrelevant in that way. I think it's very relevant for many different reasons. Hopefully you see me trying to walk the middle of this path, as it were, when discussing these things. Meaning, if you settle on the idea that religion solely exists for mind control purposes, you miss everything that I'm talking about here as it relates to what that really would have looked like if it happened now. And without that, you can't properly view your place in this world. Because the same energy and spirit of truth that was animating him is in you as well. It's just dormant. And that is what will wake you up. That's what will give you intuition. But it doesn't give it to your mind. It doesn't give it to that personality that you think you are, that name that you think you are. No, it gives it to your heart. And that's how you start to see things that you couldn't see before. And how they really convince you to do what I said is by objectifying God, right? They get you to objectify it as this bearded man in the clouds, which is not what it is. When you objectify it like that, you don't see it correctly. And it's very easy to dismiss. Which is why so many people look at their version of quote-unquote Christianity and turn away from it, because it has all of the things that I just described. The analysis is the same at the end of the day, even if this is some type of purgatory that was designed to be like this from the jump. I mean, even if it is that, it's the same calculus. It's my choice. What kind of person do I want to be? Do you want to be angry, bitter, jealous, jaded, nasty with other people? Oh, you're so dumb. You guys are so stupid. Again, I get it. Been there. And there is the inversion of what I just described, which would be fake happiness, forced positivity. You can't fake what I'm talking about here. That's one thing I can say with absolute certainty, is I'm not faking what I'm relaying to you right now. But you can do that. And maybe you do need to do that a little bit in the beginning if you're coming from a really down place. Well, maybe you got to fake it until you make it a little bit, right? you got to fake a little positivity. But I bring that up because a lot of people would look down on that. Or put another way, a lot of people would use their mind to justify staying in the negative place in the same way that you create excuses to justify chasing highs and addictions. Well, this is addiction like anything else. And you can say, oh, look at all those fake people pretending to be nice. Because that is a real part of the world as it currently exists. A lot of people who don't know any better are pretending in that way. Especially through social media, right? Creating this persona for themselves that in no way reflects reality. But that's part of the sickness. That's part of the insanity that's going on. What I'm talking about is true, genuine awe for being given the gift of this experience, even if you're in some kind of purgatory, half hell environment, right? I would probably tend to lean towards the creation was infected with something, or to put it in biblical terms, fallen angels turned it into something that it wasn't originally. Just because of so much beauty that I see around me, as far as the creation goes. I mean, just look at a redwood tree out in California. Like, would something that created a hell realm designed solely for suffering create something as beautiful as a redwood forest? Would it create something as beautiful as a deer? Even though deers are jerks, by the way. They can be jerks too. There's a little bit of over-romanticizing going on with a deer. But they can be jerks because they're so smart. They're hyper-intelligent animals. And I had deer eat a lot of tomatoes from tomato plants that I was growing, and they don't care. And I watched one time jump a 6-foot fence like it was nothing, and it didn't even have a running start. It was just standing there. If you've ever seen people do the drill where they try to see what their vertical is, the deer did that. It was just standing still. It jumped up and over a 6-foot fence, grabbed a tomato, and then walked back over and jumped over it. I watched it happen. And then the guy I was working with was like, I'm going to get the shotgun. And the deer got away, but they're very, very intelligent, and they can be jerks in that way. But then again, we went and put a farm right in the middle of their forest, and they're like, oh, free food? Okay. So who was the real jerk in the situation? Anyway, the point is, there are enough beautiful, amazing expressions of what I would perceive to be love, something created for the beauty and awe of it just existing, that it's hard for me to get on board with the purgatory hell idea. But then, of course, that's what you would tell yourself if you found yourself in prison. And actually, that's a good analogy to the situation, because that's kind of where we all find ourselves now. For all intents and purposes, we are in a prison, and we're aware of it. We've been locked up. And in that environment, you have the choice of just sulking in your cell, complaining about how everything is against you, the system is corrupt and put you there, taking no personal responsibility for anything that transpired, and of course excluding the rare situations where someone completely innocent is put in jail in a mistaken fashion. Though I suppose, metaphorically, that could happen here too. And a lot of people who are defiant and want to fight that would say, no, I'm not going to enjoy my slavery. I want out right now. Break me out of here. And I get that. Not saying that's the wrong way to think. It might be counterproductive to your experience here, which is my point, that eventually you'll become so bitter and filled with righteous indignation that you will completely lose sight of any possible lesson that you could have learned from the situation. It's funny though, isn't it, how so many prisoners are institutionalized in that way and they have a hard time functioning in the quote-unquote real world. And if we are in a reincarnation loop here, it would be a bunch of institutionalized prisoners in that way who just, they don't ever realize where they are because they're so institutionalized by the system that they're stuck in. To the point where if someone told them the truth, they would reject it. And then someone would call them an NPC. If you're honest with yourself, you were an NPC too before you figured any of this out. And that's what you always need to come back to whenever you're viewing other people in the context of what's going on here. Again, humble yourself. Stop listening to your mind. It is insane. It will tell you all kinds of things about how great you are and how bad other people are in comparison to you. Because that's its survival mechanism in this insane world. That kind of thinking is rewarded here. And so overcoming this world is overcoming your mind. Integrating it into the real you. In that way, you are correlating what is inside of you to that which is outside of you. But in doing so, you're not objectifying God as something external. It's very subtle, but eventually it makes sense, I promise you. Now, maybe I'm insane. Well, I know I'm insane. I'm definitely insane. My mind is anyway. So put another way, maybe I'm wrong here, but it doesn't matter to me where I am. Even if it's the worst possible outcome that you can imagine, wherever we are right now, I'm not going to let that change who I know that I am. Does that mean I'll be perfect all the time? Of course not. As I said, I can be miserable, I can be mean, I can be obtuse, I can be all kinds of things that are disgusting traits for an individual to have. But I will not let what this world turned me into at one point in my life define how I behave now. I will seek the truth, and I will do it in the most honorable way that I am capable of, given my limited understanding of what's really going on here. To the powers that be, give me a break here. I got a dumb, tiny human brain. I'm doing the best that I can. It's not easy. I have no interest in being at war with anyone at all. The one thing that has remained true at every single level of awareness that I have been able to acquire is that you don't know what you don't know. And that is the reason that I take the approach that I do.